So I am thrilled to be joined today by my good friend, Byron Auguste, who's the CEO of Opportunity at Work. Byron, thank you for being here with us today.
Thank you, Maria.
It's great to see you.
Well, it's great to be here, and it's great to have this wonderful backdrop.
Yeah, it's pretty nice. We should just hang out here all the time.
Yeah.
So, Byron and I, we had a lot of great conversations over this past year, as we were both, kind of living through these challenging times and leading our teams through this time. And so I thought he would just be the perfect person to help kick off the event. And so, Byron, maybe just to start, if you could just, tell us a bit about how you are seeing this recovery take shape and what you think we might do to make it more equitable.
Yeah, Maria, I think as you think about the recovery post-COVID, it's interesting to think about not only what has happened, but what hasn't happened. You may remember after 2008, not only were businesses very slow to rehire, but they were very fast to exclude. We had a huge explosion of bachelor's degree, quote unquote, requirements on jobs that had never had them before. We got to the point where 3/4 of secretarial jobs state that you have to have a bachelor's degree, even though 2/3 of administrative assistants don't have a bachelor's degree. You had a lot of exclusion being built in. And a lot of people were afraid this was going to happen again after COVID. But I'm happy to say, and I think that didn't happen actually, and in many ways led by a lot of the employers who are here active at Horizon and that we all work with together. If anything, some of them doubled down on training, on more and efforts at greater inclusion. So that's really important. But I think we're now seeing these two very disparate narratives. One is a narrative of inequality, right? And it's a very real one because the impact of COVID was so disparate by different communities. And then we have another narrative now of labor shortages, sort of related to the skills gap narrative. And what's so interesting to me is that these narratives are not really in conversation with each other, but they should be. So if we thought about those two narratives, the inequality narrative and the exclusion narrative on the one hand, and the labor shortage narrative on the other, and put them in conversation with each other, what will we actually learn? Well, one of the things we would learn is that there are 70 million Americans who are skilled through alternative routes, who don't have bachelor's degrees. They're stars. They're skilled, community colleges, through military service, apprenticeships, and they have a lot to offer. And it's interesting. We did a lot of work together during COVID, and some of that work shows that 30 million stars actually have the skills for jobs that pay 50% more, these same jobs that are in demand. And so if you think about it, that's both part of the inequality story and why people have been falling behind, and part of the labor shortage story. And there's lots of examples like this. And I think we can do much better if we start from that point to say these are two sides of the same coin.
No, I love that because I agree. I think the media covers them very differently. And I think a united approach would really make a difference for sure. And so you've been working on these issues, through McKinsey, when you were with the Obama White House, and now at Opportunity at Work. And so I think my next question is really like, how can we be thinking bigger? Because sometimes I think some of the solutions that our field kind of puts forward just aren't impacting individuals, at the scale that we need. So how do you think we can take bigger swings?
Yeah. Well, I think scale matters. I think that if we think about the meaningful impact that we're having, it's worth saying at an individual level, when you move someone from the world of, I know what I can do, but no one will give me a chance, to like actually having a chance to sort of live their fullest career in life, it matters a lot, and it redounds to their community. So I don't want to minimize the work that's being done, because there's so many champions and actually a lot of good work is being done. But if the question is, are we doing this work at the scale that would really change the trajectory as we need to? Absolutely not. We're not even close. I mentioned I mentioned 70 million stars. I mentioned there's 30 million who could be doing work that pays much more, even as businesses are looking for others. If you hone in a little bit on racial equity too, 6 million Black stars, African Americans, are actually in that situation where they could be doing work that pays much more. And so if you want to get to scale, you have to move beyond a program view. This is a labor market problem, not just a labor program problem. And you need to change government policy at large scale. And actually that is underway. You see a lot of really good thinking in the proposals of the Biden administration, but you need to change employer practices as well on a large scale. And so just the fact that tens of millions of jobs are excluding so many people who could do those jobs, that's the first thing that has to be changed, I think. And so this idea of stars, people who are skilled through alternative routes, as a talent category, that every employer in the United States should have a strategy for how they are going to be sourcing stars talent. That's the kind of thing we need to do at scale, and to turn the talent platforms that are so important in the labor market into engines of inclusion, to be able to put them on inclusion mode rather than exclusion mode. And I think I know Opportunity at Work is having a lot of interesting conversations with those talent platforms, and a lot of them want to move in that direction. So some of the pieces are in place. We're poised to sort of go tackle some of this at scale, but there's much more work to do.
And so if folks, tuning in want to get more engaged kind of around the movement with stars, like how would they do that?
Well, this idea that that stars, again, that's skilled through alternative routes, these are people who we all know, we see them doing work. 2/3 of essential workers, for example, are stars. So in the pandemic, we saw people who, frankly, were not so visible to many people at the top of companies or even the top of government. We saw them, not only their courage, but we saw their resourcefulness. We saw their ingenuity. We saw them reconfigure supply chains and delivery systems so quickly. That resourcefulness and those skills are exactly what businesses say they want. So from the standpoint of businesses, every business should, number one, remove bachelor's degree requirements for any place for any job that they're not actually required skills. If you want to have you need to have a structural engineering degree to build a bridge, that's fine. But most of these jobs in sales and administration and so forth don't require a degree. So remove that. And then ask yourself, how are we going to tap into parts of this talent pool? And I think businesses need to use their core systems. It's not enough to have a diversity initiative. For your hiring, for your pay, for your advancement, for your procurement, for that matter, you have to be using that power. And similarly in government, I'm happy to say that the Biden administration is actually very systematically working on this, both from the lens of just job opportunity, but also racial equity.
That's great. I remember a couple years ago, you and I were talking about businesses removing their hiring requirements, and you said something that has stuck with me, where it's not just the act of removing that requirement, but how many individuals without degrees are you actually hiring? And that just stuck with me, right? Because it's not just kind of the policy change, but it's making that action of hiring. So that is really key.
Yeah, and I think businesses, Maria, they do understand when businesses hire people out of college, they understand that they need to onboard them, they need to train them, and they are investing in them because they see them as being able to be leaders in their business in the future. But there's absolutely no reason you shouldn't think about stars in the same way. Think about a job like being a Salesforce administrator and the skill set required there. The vast majority of people are coming with bachelor's degrees, and yet there are a couple million Americans that are in sales and sales support roles that are actually every day doing the same kind of logical work and management of customer relationships as you would do in Salesforce. All they need to do is learn how to operate a piece of software. And I could give you 20 other examples. There's so much opportunity, and while education is a part of it, employers have to make the first move.
Awesome. And so next we're going to hear from Dr. Ibram Kendy, who's going to talk about how we start to really design and implement an anti-racist education and workforce system. So how do you think, what are some of the first steps that you believe that we can be taking as a system to truly become anti-racist?
Well, I'm excited to hear from Professor Kendy too. And I would say, look, the very first step that you need to take is a step in mindset, which is to say, when you see highly inequitable outcomes by race, is your first thought that, let's say, there's something wrong with Black people, or that there's something wrong with our system that is not working? Because if when you see inequitable outcomes, you believe there's something wrong with our system, well, then we can start working on solutions. But if you believe there's something wrong with Black people, then all you're going to get is excuses. And we are still sadly seeing a lot of excuses, like, the excuses about the pipeline, excuses about a lot of things, which isn't to say that a given business or a given institution can solve all of the problems in question. But you've got to start with the view that there's something wrong with the system, and what is it, and what's our part in it. And once you do, then you can see that there are actually, and you look at the data, you're actually empirical. You can start to see things you can do. We mentioned the bachelor's degree screen. I mean, that literally, we're spending billions of dollars to stop people from trying. That's crazy. Secondly, and we have the receipts on this, we have the data now, you can see Black stars in particular, the way they move, everyone, whether they have a bachelor's degree or not, they move based on their skills, in fact, even though we have all these degree obstacles. But what you see with Black stars is that their next job transition is only half as likely to be one that has a real wage increase. So as a result, you have millions of Black stars who actually have skills. They're middle skilled, but they're low wage. And they are working in the call centers or the retail organizations of the same companies that are saying they can't get the talent. So if you change your mindset, you can start to work on solutions. And I co-chaired Joe Biden's economic policy committee during the campaign, and now President Biden. And there was a very strong strand of racial equity throughout the policies. And you could systematically see where differences in wealth had an impact, where differences in access, where differences in historical policies. And I'm happy to say that the White House is now, the administration is now systematically going through government policies that way. Well, businesses could do the same with their procurement policies, with their hiring policies. And there is if you see people as problems to solve, we're not going to get very far. But if you see people as problem solvers and as a talent pool that you to tap in, we can get a long way. And it's not something that an individual business can solve all the problems on its own. That's not reasonable. We can't solve it in silos, but we're not going to solve it by accident. We have to solve it together and on purpose. And I think that's a very valuable role of Horizons. And I think it's a very valuable role of the kind of inclusive utilities that Opportunity Work is trying to create, like the marketplace, and to have the insights for the entire field. So I'm optimistic as to where we can get to. And the final thing I would say is just, we've seen a lot of things in the pandemic that we should never forget.
Right.
We've seen what essential workers can do. We can't go back to talking about them as low skilled. They're not. They're low wage. That's not low skilled. And we've seen that it's possible to provide income support for people to not fall through the bottom. Well, why isn't it possible to provide income support for people to rise while they need to do intensive training to get to the next level? It is possible. We now know it's possible. And so if we don't do it, it's because we've chosen not to. And that's the final word. We now know that a lot of things that people have been describing as if they're gravity, like they're a force of nature, they're not gravity. They're systems, they're institutions, they're choices, and we can make better choices.
Yeah, totally agree. So being intentional about those choices, keeping equity at the center. So I'm hopeful for the future too. So, but Byron, thank you for joining us. Thank you for your leadership. Thank you for your friendship. Thank you for being at Horizons.
Yeah, well, I'm happy to be here, Maria.